Hey, look, you came back. So, yeah, we last time went over some just programming basics, talked about variables and functions. We did mention libraries, specifically this poser library that we're going to use over and over. So now we're going to write an actual function of our own definition, that's going to do something that's actually pretty cool. It's going to ask us what we want to do. Now, if you look at where as I like to call it, stubbed out what we need to accomplish in the script, these two could happen in any order. We could find out what the user wants to delete first, or we could find the materials on the figure first. Now, as we go through, we may decide that one order is better than the other, but we don't have to commit to that. And we're going to do this one because it's more interesting. So, as I was talking about last time, in order to create a function or a definition, we need to start with these three letters, D, E, F. We then need to give it a name. So we're going to call this ask user for node to delete. And yes, I know that's a mouthful. So a lot of times just like you want to give your variables names that make sense, you want to give your functions names that make sense, that will make it obvious what you're trying to accomplish, especially if you look at the ones we have here. They've intentionally made them basic, but they're still kind of obvious. Poser.scene, that's getting us the scene. Scene.currentFigure, that's actually different than scene.figure. There may not be a scene.figure because I don't know how, oh yes, there is. It works differently though. These in any case, they still tell you what's going on. Now, I've made this really long and I've done it in what's called camel case. You don't really need to remember that, but I like that. Where I've got a string of words with no spaces, because as soon as I add a space, oh, well, I guess it isn't going to change colors on me because it doesn't know what's happening yet. But we can't have a space in the name of a variable or a definition or a function. What we can do, though, is we can capitalize the first letter of every single character. There's another way, and I feel like you see this pretty commonly in Python. Oops, I see I want to do the camel case by accident. And some people find this more readable. I get that. I just find it so much, you can see how much slower I'm typing that, whereas if I'm just doing the capitals, I can type it out at once. This also works, basically putting these underscores between the words. I- Yeah, I don't like it as much. It's a personal thing, but you can use either one. Now, what I would recommend is be consistent. And the other thing I'll point out, because this is pretty frequent, and my variables start with lowercase letters. My functions start with uppercase. And you'll notice that here too. My scene is in lowercase, but the function scene is in uppercase. And that is another very common convention in programming, just to help people read what's happening. There's no reason you have to do it that way, but you're going to have a lot harder time figuring out your scripts when problems come up, and it's going to make it really hard for other people to read as well. So it's really good to follow these conventions, because making your script human readable as well as readable by the computer, by Python, these are both important things. So this definition isn't done yet. We always are going to have, with the definition, parentheses. Sometimes, like this one we made the other day, we're going to pass a variable in. We're going to put a variable there. We're not going to do that right now. We didn't do that on any of these, and that's going to depend on the function you're using, whether it needs a variable or not. And that'll begin to make more sense as we make more functions. The other thing we need, and if you notice when I added these in, this all became bright white. This is my text editor warning me, basically, that I have a typo, and you may have seen me do this last time. I originally wrote this without that, and when I pasted it over, I was able to tell by the color of the text that I had missed that colon. Python's a pretty friendly language in that sense. It's not as big on punctuation as some others. It doesn't mean it's not important, but a lot of languages, you need lots of these curly braces and semicolons and all kinds of other things. We don't need that much in Python. But we do need this colon. This is part of what tells Python this is the name of the definition. This is the declaration for that definition. When I hit enter, because of the text editor I'm using, I get this automatic indentation, and that's important too. Indentations are another thing Python uses to know what belongs to what. So anything that's one indentation in is going to be part of this definition until I get back out here somewhere. Comments don't count in a sense. It doesn't matter how my comments are indented. It's often nice to indent them along with whatever you're doing. But this indentation is important, and it'll start to make more sense as we write more. But you'll see it over here again. I indented this in because this is the function. And when I had a few more lines, we might as well. We had, if we say printed result, I don't think this is how I wrote it last time, and we can return result. But because all of these are indented, they're all part of this definition. Okay, so back over here. So what are we going to do? Well, what we want is we want to make a text box that the user can type something into. So they're going to tell us, we're going to ask them what we want to delete. And Poser's made that easy for us. Poser has a lot of built-in, simple user interface elements that are easy to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a couple variables. Again, pretty much everything we're going to do is going to have variables somewhere. So this first one we're going to call message, and it's going to say enter the node you want to delete. I may change this later and you'll see why, but we're going to use that for now, and I feel like there should be a period. Again, that big pink that just happened is warning me I need both of these quotation marks, and we'll talk about why in a minute. Now I'm going to make this other variable that's just equal to 1, and that one kind of looks weird. So let's talk about what's happening here. So again, we're declaring two variables, and these variables, they happen to be a very specific type. So you don't have to worry about that a lot in Python. Like I said last time, you just have to give it a name and say equal to, but this is what's called a string. And it is important you're aware of what's a string, especially because Poser makes a lot of use of strings. If you recall last time when we tried to print out the names of the figure, the first time I got some sort of gobbledygook because we weren't using the string attached to the figure. A string is basically text. It's a string of characters or a string of letters. And it can't even be one letter, but it's usually more than one. And so that's what message is. Parent dialog is an integer. Now, it probably seems really fancy here. It isn't. I've called it this because I'm going to need to know what I'm using this one for. I probably don't even have to declare this variable, but it may help make my code a little more readable, so that's why I'm going to do it. And like I said, this looks a little mysterious, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a dialog window. And because Poser is based in Python, the windows we get here in the interface, they're using a lot of the same stuff. Not identical, but very similar. And actually, we'll do things a lot more like what Poser does later on. But for now, we're just going to do this. We are going to make a dialog window. So again, we've just declared a variable. And we're going to set it equal to Poser dialog text. Oh, is it simple text or is it text? I don't remember, but you know what? I know how to find out. There we go. Dialog text entry. That's what I want. So this is again that Poser reference manual because I don't always remember these things, and it does have to be exact. You will notice here, and again, this is pretty hard to read, and don't worry if it doesn't make too much sense, but it tells us that we need a dialog type parent dialog and a string type message. And that's why I called this thing parent dialog over here. Okay. So, and I just completely forgot again. Dialog text entry. Okay. Dialog text entry. And that's going to have our parent dialog, and it's going to have our message. So what I'm going to do right now to make it more obvious what this is doing, I'm actually going to come down to the very end and I'm going to call that declaration. So when I say call, what I mean is we're going to ask the program to run it. Actually, let me comment this out for a minute just so you can kind of see what that means. So I'm going to save as that. Oh, I got this guy up. We are going to run the script, and just one thing you'll notice is for organization for myself, this is lesson 2, so it's delete nodes 2. That's just so I can keep track of the changes we're making. And nothing happened. That was pretty anticlimactic. And that's because we've told it about a lot of stuff, but we haven't actually asked it to do anything. So when I uncomment that, when I get rid of the pound sign, and when we save it like this, ask user for node, and now we run this, it's going to do something a lot more interesting. Or it's not. Okay, why are you not doing something a lot more interesting? Oh, I know why. Because we're missing one other thing. We need to show our dialogue. Let's try it now. Okay. Ah, there we go. Enter the node you want to delete. Yay! Is the node we want to delete. Okay. So let me actually do that again. Because we run the script and enter the node you want to delete. So here's our dialog box. So that is this, or dialog window. And enter the node you want to delete. That is our message. Now this parent dialog thing is just telling it don't take over from Poser. We still want Poser to be in charge. And now we have a place and we can enter whatever we want. We're going to enter some gobbledygook. It's not doing anything with that yet. But it's still kind of cool. That's how easy it is, this poser.dialog text entry. It's pretty easy to make that window appear. So this is a tool Poser has given us to make it easy to enter input. Now we want to do something with that input. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to make a variable, lots of variables, node to delete. And we're going to call and we're going to set this equal to, rather, dialog window dot text, and then we're gonna print node to delete. So let's see if this does what we want, because a lot of programming is trying to see if it does what we want. Hi there. And we got hi there. So we haven't done anything with nodes yet, but what we've done is we've made a dialog window that takes input and we can do something with it. All we're doing at the moment is printing, but we've actually made a working definition here. So this might seem like a lot. And part of the reason it might is because there are all of these functions that I'm pulling from this Poser library. And this is where I said this is different than a lot of ways of learning to script. A lot of times you're just going to be doing simple additions and subtractions, and then you're going to start doing logic, which we haven't done any of that yet. In this case, what I want you to see is how to actually use Poser with Python. And that's why we're doing things. This just calls a function on a dialog text entry window that returns the text that was entered. Now, here's where it's sometimes easier when you're trying to figure out what code means to read it backwards. And so here's what I mean by that. And some of these will be easier and some won't. This is actually a great line for that. So the dialog window, and that makes sense, that because we've given that variable a good name, our dialog window, and we're asking it for text. Oh, and we're going to make that text equal to the node to delete. Sometimes reading it backwards like that helps. So this one's a little more complicated because in this case, we're calling Poser dialog text entry parent dialog.message. Again, that's kind of confusing, but if we look at it this way, we're taking a parent dialog and a message. We're using that on a dialog text entry. Oh, okay, so this has something to do with that dialog box, and this has something to do, this is probably the message for it, and we're using the ones given to us by Poser. So that's where reading the code backwards, in a sense, can sometimes help you make more sense of it. As you get better, as you look at more code, you'll just say, oh, print node to delete. And that's one that's just as easy to read one way as the other. Okay, so we have this. We're not using any nodes yet, but we've made a nice little definition here that actually does something. But let's do one more thing, because eventually we're going to want to do something with node to delete. And so what I'm going to say is I'm going to say return node to delete. So what return does is it says give me back something. When I call this function, I want to actually get something out of it. So this was like on over here where we wanted to get whatever number we passed plus 2, we returned that result and it printed, I believe, 7 because we were using 5. Return tells the definition this is what you're going to be equal to. And that'll make more sense in a second here. What we're going to do is, it's probably not going to do what I want at the moment. Hi. Oh, so it did print, so it didn't give me an error. I thought it might. What we could also do is we could declare a variable called myInput, and we can set it now equal to ask user for node to delete. And after we do that, we're going to print oops, no, it doesn't really matter. My input is, and we're going to put my input. So here's why we're doing this. What's going to happen now, oops, wrong menu, run Python script, is once we do this and we say I don't want to say my input, we're going to say Victoria because I'm looking at her. Victoria, my input is Victoria. So what happened there is we printed what we typed in there, and then we also printed this variable that happens to equal what we returned. So hopefully that makes some sense. The return is what we get out of the definition, and you're not always going to want to get stuff out of definitions. But in this case we do. In fact, if you remember, before we added this in, we were just printing here, and all of this at the moment is repetitive of that. But later on, when we actually have these other functions to deal with the materials, we're going to want to know what that input is. So we've got, again, a definition or a function. It's pretty much at the moment all made up of variables that we've been setting. And that's how we're going to do a lot of stuff in Python. We are going to be getting pretty soon to some logic, and that'll let us do more. But at the moment, we've just got a very nice, simple thing. And like I said, I don't know if I can emphasize, I hope you realize how cool it is, that that's all I needed to do to create code that it's a box, it's really exciting that I can type that in, and that's all it takes. So that's a really nice thing. And so hopefully you think it's pretty cool that you have now made a window that takes input. All right, I will see you again next time.